Essays are generally scholarly pieces of writing giving the author's own argument, but the definition is vague, overlapping with those of an article, a pamphlet and a short story. Essays can consist of a number of elements, including literary criticism, political manifestos, learned arguments, observations of daily life, recollections, and reflections of the author. Almost all modern essays are written in prose, but works in verse have been dubbed essays. While brevity usually defines an essay, voluminous works like John Locke's An Essay Concerning Human Understanding and Thomas Malthus's An Essay on the Principle of Population are counterexamples. In some countries, essays have become a major part of formal education. Secondary students are taught structured essay formats to improve their writing skills. Admission essays are often used by universities in selecting applicants. And in the humanities and social sciences, essays are often used as a way of assessing the performance of students during final exams. The concept of an essay has been extended to other mediums beyond writing. A film essay is a movie which often incorporates documentary filmmaking styles and which focuses more on the evolution of a theme or an idea. A photographic essay is an attempt to cover a topic with a linked series of photographs. It may or may not have an accompanying text or captions. Definitions. An essay has been defined in a variety of ways. One definition is a prose composition with a focused subject of discussion, or a long, systematic discourse. It is difficult to define the genre into which essays fall. Aldous Huxley, the leading essayist, gives guidance on the subject. He notes that the essay is a literary device for saying almost everything about almost anything, and adds that, by tradition, almost by definition, the essay is a short piece. Furthermore, Huxley argues that essays belong to a literary species whose extreme variability can be studied most effectively within a three-poled frame of reference. These three poles are the personal and the autobiographical. The essayists that feel most comfortable in this pole write fragments of reflective autobiography and look at the world through the keyhole of anecdote and description. The objective, the factual, and the concrete particular. The essayists that write from this pole do not speak directly of themselves, but turn their attention outward to some literary or scientific or political theme. Their art consists on setting forth, passing judgment upon, and drawing general conclusions from the relevant data. The abstract universal. In this pole, we find those essayists who do their work in the world of high abstractions, who are never personal and who seldom mention the particular facts of experience. Huxley adds that the most richly satisfying essays are those which make the best not of one, not of two, but of all the three worlds in which it is possible for the essay to exist. The word essay derives from the French infinitive essayer, to try, or to attempt. In English, essay first meant a trial, or an attempt, and this is still an alternative meaning. The Frenchman Michel de Montaigne was the first author to describe his work as essays. He used the term to characterize these as attempts to put his thoughts into writing, and his essays grew out of his commonplacing, inspired in particular by the works of Plutarch, a translation of whose Œuvres Morales into French had just been published by Jacques Amiot. Montaigne began to compose his essays in 1572. The first edition, Untitled Essays, was published in 2 volumes in 1580. For the rest of his life he continued revising previously published essays and composing new ones. Francis Bacon's essays, published in book form in 1597, 1612, and 1625, were the first works in English that described themselves as essays. Ben Jonson first used the word essayist in English in 1609, according to the Oxford English Dictionary. History. Europe. English essayists included Robert Burton and Sir Thomas Browne. In France, Michel de Montaigne's three-volume essays in the mid-1500s contain over 100 examples, widely regarded as the predecessor of the modern essay. In Italy, Baldassare Castiglione wrote about courtly manners in his essay Il Libro del Cortegiano. In the 17th century, the Jesuit Balthasar Gracian wrote about the theme of wisdom. During the Age of Enlightenment, essays were a favored tool of polemicists who aimed at convincing readers of their position. They also featured heavily in the rise of periodical literature, as seen in the works of Joseph Addison, Richard Steele and Samuel Johnson. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Edmund Burke and Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote essays for the general public. The early 19th century in particular saw a proliferation of great essayists in English. William Hazlitt, Charles Lamb, Leigh Hunt and Thomas de Quincey all penned numerous essays on diverse subjects. In the 20th century, a number of essayists tried to explain the new movements in art and culture by using essays. Whereas some essayists use essays for strident political themes, Robert Louis Stevenson and Willa Cather wrote lighter essays. Virginia Woolf, Edmund Wilson, and Charles Dubois wrote literary criticism essays. Japan. As with the novel, essays existed in Japan several centuries before they developed in Europe, with the genre of essays known as zuihatsu, loosely connected essays and fragmented ideas. Zuihatsu have existed since almost the beginnings of Japanese literature. Many of the most noted early works of Japanese literature in this genre. Notable examples include The Pillow Book by court lady Sei Shonagon, and Suri Soregusa by particularly renowned Japanese Buddhist monk Yoshida Kenko. Kenko described his short writings similarly to Montaigne, referring to them as nonsensical thoughts written in idle hours. Another noteworthy difference from Europe is that women have traditionally written in Japan, though the more formal, Chinese-influenced writings of male writers were more prized at the time. As an educational tool, in countries like the United States and the United Kingdom, essays have become a major part of a formal education in the form of free response questions. Secondary students in these countries are taught structured essay formats to improve their writing skills, and essays are often used by universities in these countries in selecting applicants. In both secondary and tertiary education, essays are used to judge the mastery and comprehension of material. Students are asked to explain, comment on, or assess a topic of study in the form of an essay. During some courses, university students will often be required to complete one or more essays that are prepared over several weeks or months. In addition, in fields such as the humanities and social sciences, mid-term and end-of-term examinations often require students to write a short essay in 2 or 3 hours. In these countries, so-called academic essays, which may also be called papers, are usually more formal than literary ones. They may still allow the presentation of the writer's own views, but this is done in a logical and factual manner, with the use of the first person often discouraged. Longer academic essays are often more discursive. They sometimes begin with a short summary analysis of what has previously been written on a topic, which is often called a literature review. Longer essays may also contain an introductory page in which words and phrases from the title are tightly defined. Most academic institutions will require that all substantial facts, quotations, and other supporting material used in an essay be referenced in a bibliography or works cited page at the end of the text. This scholarly convention allows others to understand the basis of the facts and quotations used to support the essay's argument, and thereby help to evaluate to what extent the argument is supported by evidence, and to evaluate the quality of that evidence. One essay guide of a U.S. university makes the distinction between research papers and discussion papers. The guide states that a research paper is intended to uncover a wide variety of sources on a given topic. As such, research papers tend to be longer and more inclusive in their scope and with the amount of information they deal with, while discussion papers also include research, They tend to be shorter and more selective in their approach, and more analytical and critical, whereas a research paper would typically quote a wide variety of sources. A discussion paper aims to integrate the material in a broader fashion. One of the challenges facing U.S. universities is that in some cases, students may submit essays which have been purchased from an essay mill as their own work. An essay mill is a ghostwriting service that sells pre-written essays to university and college students. Since plagiarism is a form of academic dishonesty or academic fraud, universities and colleges may investigate papers suspected to be from an essay mill by using Internet plagiarism detection software, which compares essays against a database of known mill essays, and by orally testing students on the contents of their papers. Forms and styles. This section describes the different forms and styles of essay writing. These forms and styles are used by an array of authors, including university students and professional essayists. Cause and effect. The defining features of a cause and effect essay are causal chains that connect from a cause to an effect, careful language, and chronological or emphatic order. A writer using this rhetorical method must consider the subject, determine the purpose, consider the audience, think critically about different causes or consequences, consider a thesis statement, arrange the parts, consider the language, and decide on a conclusion. Classification and division. Classification is the categorization of objects into a larger whole, while division is the breaking of a larger whole into smaller parts. Compare and contrast. Compare and contrast essays are characterized by a basis for comparison, points of comparison, and analogies. It is grouped by object or by point. Comparison highlights the similarities between two or more similar objects, while contrasting highlights the differences between two or more objects. When writing a compare-contrast essay, writers need to determine their purpose, consider their audience, consider the basis and points of comparison, consider their thesis statement, arrange and develop the comparison, and reach a conclusion. Compare and contrast is arranged emphatically. Descriptive writing is characterized by sensory details, which appeal to the physical senses, and details that appeal to a reader's emotional, physical, or intellectual sensibilities. Determining the purpose, considering the audience, creating a dominant impression, using descriptive language, and organizing the description are the rhetorical choices to be considered when using a description. A description is usually arranged spatially but can also be chronological or emphatic. The focus of a description is the scene. Description uses tools such as denotative language, connotative language, figurative language, metaphor, and simile to arrive at a dominant impression. One university essay guide states that descriptive writing says what happened or what another author has discussed. It provides an account of the topic. Lyric essays are an important form of descriptive essays. Dialectic. In the dialectic form of essay, which is commonly used in philosophy, the writer makes a thesis, an argument, then objects to their own argument, but then counters the counter-argument with the final and novel argument. This form benefits from presenting a broader perspective while countering a possible flaw that it may present. Exemplification. An exemplification essay is characterized by a generalization and relevant, representative, and believable examples including anecdotes. Writers need to consider their subject, determine their purpose, consider their audience, decide on specific examples, and arrange all the parts together when writing an exemplification essay. Familiar essays are ones in which essayists speak as if to a single reader, writing about both themselves and about particular subjects. Anne Fadiman notes that the genre's heyday was the early 19th century, and that its greatest exponent was Charles Lamb. She also suggests that while critical essays have more brain than heart, and personal essays have more heart than brain, familiar essays have equal measures of both. History. A history essay, sometimes referred to as a thesis essay, will describe an argument or claim about one or more historical events and will support that claim with evidence, arguments and references. The text makes it clear to the reader why the argument or claim is as such. Narrative. A narrative uses tools such as flashbacks, flash-forwards, and transitions that often build to a climax. The focus of a narrative is the plot. When creating a narrative, authors must determine their purpose, consider their audience, establish their point of view, use dialogue, and organize the narrative. A narrative is usually arranged chronologically. Critical. A critical essay is an argumentative piece of writing, aimed at presenting objective analysis of the subject matter, narrowed down to a single topic. The main idea of all the criticism is to provide an opinion either of positive or negative implication. As such, a critical essay requires research and analysis, strong internal logic and sharp structure. Each argument should be supported with sufficient evidence, relevant to the point. Economic. An economic essay can start with a thesis, or it can start with a theme. It can take a narrative course and a descriptive course. It can even become an argumentative essay if the author feels the need. After the introduction, the author has to do her best to expose the economic matter at hand, to analyze it, evaluate it, and draw a conclusion. If the essay takes more of a narrative form, then the author has to expose each aspect of the economic puzzle in a way that makes it clear and understandable for the reader. Other logical structures. The logical progression and organizational structure of an essay can take many forms. Understanding how the movement of thought is managed through an essay has a profound impact on its overall cogency and ability to impress. A number of alternative logical structures for essays have been visualized as diagrams, making them easy to implement or adapt in the construction of an argument. Magazine or newspaper. Essays often appear in magazines, especially magazines with an intellectual bent, such as The Atlantic and Harper's Magazine, and newspaper essays use many of the essay types described in the section on forms and styles. Some newspapers also print essays in the op-ed section. Employment essays detailing experience in a certain occupational field are required when applying for some jobs, especially government jobs in the United States. Essays known as knowledge skills and executive core qualifications are required when applying to certain U.S. federal government positions. A KSA, or knowledge, skills, and abilities, is a series of narrative statements that are required when applying to federal government job openings in the United States. KSAs are used along with resumes to determine who the best applicants are when several candidates qualify for a job. The knowledge, skills and abilities necessary for the successful performance of a position are contained on each job vacancy announcement. KSAs are brief and focused essays about one's career and educational background that presumably qualify one to perform the duties of the position being applied for. An executive core qualification, or ECQ, is a narrative statement that is required when applying to senior executive service positions within the U.S. federal government. Like the KSAs, ECQs are used along with resumes to determine who the best applicants are when several candidates qualify for a job. The Office of Personnel Management has established 5 executive core qualifications that all applicants seeking to enter the senior executive service must demonstrate.